Hi, this is Miss Veldman-Tentori and welcome to week 3 of Ebusiness for 2017. So this week's online lecture will take you through our website's overview and analysis. We enjoyed meeting you in the workshops this week, those of you who made it, and by now you should have all downloaded and read the syllabus from Blackboard. So this is a copy of the syllabus, and one of the most useful parts of this is the schedule. This schedule will help you keep up to date with what you should be doing each week, because if you slip behind, it's going to really stack up. So this week, we're doing websites overview and analysis. You should still be working through the digital garage, the Google Digital Garage. You should be well underway with that. In week 1, you did take Ebusiness online, the short lessons there. This week, you'll be doing selling goods and service online. There is no live workshop this week, but you'll be working through your assessment. So in the workshops last week and also on Blackboard, you should have downloaded already now the Ebusiness Assignment 1, read through it, and by now you should have chosen a business to do as the case study. If not, make sure you do it urgently. If you have any questions, come and ask in the Facebook group. But to move on with today's online lecture. So we've already talked about e-business and ICT trends, business planning and opportunities, and you can go back and watch those online lectures if you haven't yet. Today we'll talk about websites overview and analysis, and then we have another few online lectures coming up in the coming weeks. So today's lecture, we'll do a bit of a recap on what we've done so far, just to remind you of a few of the concepts you should be familiar with. We'll talk about websites, which are one of the main parts of ICT. They're not the only one in ICT for a business, but they are a main part. Possible alternatives to websites, a brief look at a financial analysis, talk about your case study again, the assignments, and a quick preview of the next block. A reminder about the workshops and what we're covering, and then a reminder of where to go with questions. So for a recap, we've talked about what e-business is, and I've encouraged you to go and look up exactly what it is and where to find that kind of thing. Oops, sorry, I've lost something here. I'll go back there. This was one model that can give you a bit of an idea of all the things that are covered by e-business. A reminder to do your own research and referencing in your report about what is e-business and what will you be covering in your case study. We also gave you a few ideas about some of the ICT trends that may be relevant that you might look into for your case study as well. But it's very flexible. As long as you do some research, you back it up with referencing, and you can explain that in the report, the assignment. In the workshop last week, we introduced you to business models and personas in both the workshop and the online lectures, so you should be applying those now to your case study. In your assignment, you need to have a completed business model canvas, so the one-page overview like this, and each of those 9 sections should be essentially dot points. And underneath in your assignment report, you will describe a little bit more about each of those areas. If you bring a completed model, a business model canvas, and your personas to the next workshop, then we can give you a bit of a hand and get a bit of feedback before you hand in your assignment. That was one example of what a persona is. So the personas represent the key target market for your business that you're looking at for a case study. It's not the only way to do it. The Google Digital Garage has some examples. There's other examples you can find online. Throughout, you should also be considering the impact of culture. So you are picking a business anywhere in the world, and I know a lot of you are from different countries, which makes it really interesting, and you should be a little bit familiar with what the culture is and how that impacts your business. So we'll have another online lecture focusing more on that, but I wanted to remind you to keep that in mind. And social media is another part of ICT in business, and we'll go into some more depth on that in the future as well. But let's get stuck into websites. So these are some videos that we recommend you have a watch rather than play them for you now in the online lecture. I will put the links on Blackboard for you to watch. So this one will give you a bit of a brief history of the internet and how we got to the point that we are now. a lot of you are at the age where I'm sure you'll pretty much take the internet for granted. I'm not that old, but I still remember when the internet was not a part of our day-to-day life, and that wasn't really that long ago. Our website started out with very static, what's called HTML websites. You can also Google what these terms mean or do a bit of your own research, but they started as something that was only offered and hand-coded by specialized firms. So it was very expensive for a business to set up a website. Then in the 2000s, things like blogs started coming out, excuse me, with Blogger and WordPress making some big changes about how people could set up a website and made it really easy for small businesses to set up a website. So that is why you are choosing a small business case study, because the way that websites have become more simple for a very small business to set up and more affordable has had a huge impact on the business world. Net neutrality is a concept that you should also be familiar with, and that really levels the playing field. It's a type of ethics where different laws have come in, but also just guidelines to make sure that the big organizations aren't dominating the internet. So I'll put that link on Blackboard as well for you to watch. Web 2.0 is something that you'll hear often. Excuse me. The first term was coined in 1999, but it's been used regularly since. And what they mean by Web 2.0 is essentially interactivity, because Web 1.0 was where information just got put on a website and there wasn't really much interaction. It was more like an online brochure. But now there's user-generated content, engagement, usability, and social, and we're very used to having two-way conversations online. But most importantly, anyone with some basic skills, like the ones that we are trying to teach you in this module, it gives you a real estate or a property online. It lets you compete in the international business world online. This is a blog post I actually wrote for my own business a few years ago when I was working with clients, and I used to build websites. I don't do it so much anymore, particularly now I'm teaching, but I've built a lot of my own websites. And what I've found is there's a lot of levels that I wasn't aware of at the beginning. Some of you may know this, but for a lot of you, you won't realize how many different layers and levels there are in a website. I've put it into a pyramid. It doesn't have to be in that, but it just gives you an idea. And I've compared it to a house. And the next few slides will give you just one way to analyze a website. So any website that you're looking at, and particularly your case study for your assignment, here's just one way to analyze it. So firstly, when you have a website, you need hosting. And if you're comparing this to a house, it's kind of like the block of land your house is built on. Like land, there's a very wide variety of options and packages available, and I won't go into depth now. We'll talk more about websites in block 2, but it's just necessary to know that hosting is crucial for a website. Some of the free websites give you free hosting, and for others you need to pay for it. Backups. I learned this the hard way, to not have website backups. I kind of assumed it was just being done in the cloud somewhere until I got hacked once. But it's like having some kind of insurance for your house or a security system. You need to back up your site. Again, some of the free sites, like the WordPress ones we'll be working with, do this automatically. But once you move across and upgrade your site and start growing as a business, this is something you need to take into consideration. The back end is something that website developers talk about, and the database. This is like the areas behind the walls and the roof if you're comparing it to a house. You don't see these things, but they're essential to the smooth running of your website. So these are all the bits of data and the type of coding that those of you who have worked with coding are familiar with. But for many people these days, you don't need to know coding to work on a website. Then you get a little bit more visible. You have your URL, your unique record locator, and your email address. So things like my own business website is zesty.com, and then you have an email which makes it professional, like renee@zesty.com. So when you're doing your case study, you can look at what is the URL and do they have an email address. So some very brand new businesses and possibly not very professional looking ones might have an email address like, I don't know, zesty@gmail.com. And you can look into why that might not be as professional as something like renee@zesty.com. The template and web design. So this is now that your house, your website is built, you can make it pretty. It's a bit like interior design. So in block 2, we'll dive into more depth and we'll teach you what the CRAP principles are. You can hire a graphic designer, or there's tools popping up to make things easier for small businesses, like canva.com is one of my favorites. The front end of your site. So this is where you interact with the content, like a front door. It's a more user-friendly version of the backend and database I talked about earlier, and this is where in WordPress you'll all be working with this next block. Some people do change the terms. What I refer to as front end, some people might refer to as back end, but the concept is that there's one place where all the bits of data hide in the coding that don't make a whole lot of sense to just read through normally, and then there's what I call the front end and what a lot of people call the front end, which is also called a content management system, where you can type in a bit like using a Word document. Widgets and plugins is a term that's very relevant to working on websites, and this is something I've compared to the furniture in a website, the furniture in a house. There's a lot of bits that you can add in to make your website do things or function differently. For the free sites, this will be a lot more limited. You kind of get a package and that's it for the free sites, but then when you start upgrading as a business grows, there's more and more widgets and plugins. We'll learn more about this in the second block as well. This is just an introduction so you can start thinking about analyzing a website. The content, this is where you move into your house or move into your website and start putting a unique personality on it. And this is where the Google Digital Garage will be helping you, as well as the business model canvas, as well as the personas, to think about who is using your site. How should you be writing for them? What kind of content, like texts and images, should you be putting on that's relevant to your target market? Social media is kind of like getting social and having a party at your website, but it's connecting your website to Facebook, Twitter, any other social networks, and it works both ways. You'll often see symbols on a website, like the Facebook or the Twitter. Sometimes if you click them, it'll take you to the Facebook page or Twitter account, and sometimes it'll just share their site on your networks. But either way, it's getting social and getting the word out there about your website. And a final part that a lot of good websites have is a blog. And this is where you write and keep everyone up to date with what's happening with your business. And it's slightly different than having just content on your site, because it's a section, some people call it a news section on their site, but it's adding fresh content regularly, whereas most of the other pages of your website are relatively static, meaning that they stay there fairly long term, whereas your blog is usually added to really regularly. Blog versus a website. So once upon a time, a blog and a website were two completely separate things, but now they're often merged together. Every good website, I think, should have a blog, and every blog is essentially a website these days. So which platform? We'll talk more about this in block 2, but there are a lot of different platforms to build a website on. So the business that you're analysing in your case study will be one of very many different platforms, and these are just a few of the ones out there. Different ways to build. So I've already had this question in one of my workshops, and I get it every year. Will we be coding? No, in this module we will not be getting that much in depth into building a website. We will be using a content management system, and we will all be using WordPress, and this is the reason why. When I first started building websites, I've tried lots of different ones, Wix, Weebly, and there's countless ones out there. But WordPress is one that I've chosen to work with exclusively, but I also think is a skill that all of you should at least experiment with, so you will be for this assignment or for assignment 2. It's one of the biggest platforms out there, and it's free. The WordPress.com part is free. You can also set up a blog there as well as a website. And WordPress.org is also free. It's the way that you build a website, but then you still need to get the hosting. So we'll talk more about that later. But for analysis of your business for assignment 1, you really only need to start thinking about which platform do you think they may have used. This may be obvious or not. And in block 2, we'll go into more depth with WordPress. This module is called Ebusiness, but it's also related to e-commerce, which means just selling on your website. So this week with Google, you're doing the sell goods and services online with the Google Digital Garage, and they talk about that in great depth. There's a few ways out there that you can analyze websites in ICT that give you a kind of report. These are 2 that I've run on my own website recently. There's HubSpot, websitegrader.com. You used to just be able to do that online. Now, well, you still can do it online, but you need to put in an email address. You can do that if you choose to. You can put in, I believe, any website and your own email address. And the Google one, I don't think you need to put an email address in to begin with. So I was logged in with Google when I tried it, but these 2 ways are things that you might like to experiment with for your assignment to analyze the website of the business you've chosen for a case study. Are there alternatives to a website is something I wanted to just get you thinking about. So does a business really need a website? And when you're analysing the ICT, this is a question you can ask yourself and include in the report. There's a lot of pros and cons for each. Some businesses I've worked with in the past said, oh, I only want a blog, or I'll have a Facebook page instead, or an app. There are other options as well that you might think of. So I'm not going to answer this in great depth. I'll let you think this through a little bit and ask questions in the Facebook group if you'd like to, or in the workshops. But my take on this after working with a lot of different businesses is that these alternatives are not really alternatives in terms of they should be additional things for a business. I think that every business should have a website, and you'll find that in most cases your business case study will as well. And the reason is that the business needs to be online to reach more people. And you own your website. Even though you may have issues, for example, it may get hacked, you've got a lot more control over your own website than you do over social media. So financial analysis, we'll talk a bit more about this in the workshop, and in this module we're not going to go into huge financial analysis, but as business students you should be thinking about, right, we're writing a business model plan and what are things going to cost. So in your business model canvas, the parts down the bottom will cover financial analysis. You'll be thinking about how the business spends money and where their income comes from. And I've given you a few tips here about what it costs to run a website, for example. So whatever ICT analysis you do, whatever ICT you say that your business is using, have a think about what kind of costs are incurred for that, and see what kind of research you can will uncover those costs. So for resources to find out more about costs, we'll go into more detail in block 2, but for this report you need to have at least a small section on the finances. These are just a couple of places to start to research about what your business would be paying. Of course, if you're in contact with the business, you can simply ask them, but if not, these are some places to try and find out. So a reminder for your case study, you need to have one by now. Go through page 3 of the assignment here on Blackboard, where we give you some guidelines of how to choose one. A lot of my students discussed it with me in the workshop. Discuss it with your lecturer if you haven't already. It should have been talked about in the workshop this week. So I suggest that if you haven't yet done it, come and ask in the Facebook group. One example, this is a business I've worked for before, thehagueonline.com, and that's an example of their back end of their website. They also have Feel at Home in The Hague, but you're looking for a small website. So, for example, if you chose something like this, you'd be going through the website. You can talk to the business if you want to, but you don't have to, and you'd be analysing different parts of the site. So for the assignments and the next block, all of that information is on Blackboard. Just a reminder to keep yourself up to date with that. The workshops, there's no workshop this week, but there will be next week. So make sure that you bring along any questions, and again, bring along your completed business model canvas and completed personas if you'd like a head start on the assignment, because if you wait until you just hand it in, they may not be on the right track. This way we can give you some direct feedback in the workshops. If you have any questions, come and ask in the Facebook group. I've also set up a discussion board on Blackboard, and we look forward to hearing if you've got any questions or if we can help you any further. But that wraps up week 3, and I hope that you're learning a lot and enjoying the module.